Grinder School, this is CodeRed Rules. Welcome back. This week I'm going to be doing some selected hands from the last Grinder School Cash Game series. We're playing 4L6 Max on Merge. Alright, so what I've done was I chose the hands from, most of the hands from the players who didn't do so hot in the past week, so hopefully you guys have a more weighted hand review section than some of the other videos that we've done. Alright, so this first hand I'm going to be reviewing, Ultra Covert here has pocket tens. He raises on the button, and X Uranisis, he goes by Kenny. I usually just call him Kenny. He goes by K for 5606 on the forums. Pretty aggressive player. I believe he plays full ring normally, so keep that as it may. And Ultra Covert calls the 3-bet. So Ultra Covert in this situation has been playing just fine. Nothing. He should be doing nothing differently. Keep in mind though, this is going to be really early played in the session, so we've only been playing for maybe about 10-12 minutes. I'm not sure on any history between these two, but even at some of the most egregious history, right, where you guys have been fighting back and forth, re-raising a hand like 3-4 offsuit is never warranted. All right, let's go ahead and look at PokerStove real quick, and you can see where 3-4 offsuit is on the list, and we're all the way down here. Okay, there are only 3 or 2 worse hands than 4-3 offsuit that you could possibly be playing right now, and so many better hands. And so a lot of the times players will sit here and say, well, I can 3-bet, any 2 cards in this situation and have it be profitable, so I'm going to do that. And in reality, that's maybe sometimes possible because this person's folds so much, but that doesn't mean you should take advantage of it with any 2 cards. All right? We can choose the profitability of our bluff quite a bit here by choosing which hands we want to be 3-betting with. Now, I don't know if you have your HUD open or not, but if you have the same HUD stats I have on Ultra Covert, then you're going to see that he plays it pretty tight. If you double click on him here, nothing really comes up. So, I mean, against someone this tight, now this could potentially be from either full ring or 6 max, and so what I would recommend doing is avoid looking at the overall VPIP and pre-flop raise stats and going directly to positional stats, because positional stats between both games, full ring and 6 max, are the exact same, right? So go here to the button raise, and we're going to see that he raises 23% on the button. So he raises somewhat wider, right? But not nearly as wide as, say, somebody like Kenny does. So Kenny raises twice as often on the button. Right. You guys actually both have very similar folded 3-bet stats. You have 59% Kenny, Ultra Covert has 64%. Although you've got a much wider sample, Ultra Covert very rarely gets 3-bet because he's just such a tight player that no one really decides to 3-bet or bluff him. With that folded 3-bet stat, it's not necessarily any 2 cards 3-bet. All right. And against someone who raises that tight, the best way to to have a profitable 3-bet bluff game is to choose players that are opening a wide range and then folding a significant amount. Ultra Covert fits into maybe one of those categories where he folds a decent amount, but he doesn't open wide enough that we can decide that re-raising any 2 cards becomes profitable. So in a situation if I'm Kenny, I think that the lowest I'd be willing to 3-bet bluff with in this scenario is probably something like a suited aces here. Maybe King 9, Queen 9, suited. I wouldn't be 3-betting first off any offsuit cards. Do not deserve a 3-bet when you've got so many better options here for suited. And you got to think about your range as a whole, right? Not necessarily just how playing one hand. You got to think about how does re-raising 4-3 offsuit here affect your entire hand range. In reality, when you 3-bet a hand like 4-3 and then fold a hand like King Jack, you certainly take away profitable hands out of your hand range and throw in unprofitable ones. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on from this one. I think post-flop was played pretty standard. I think Kenny, you could have actually continuation bet this flop with the 4, just trying to get your opponent to fold some of the more marginal stuff. Because if Ultra Covert here woke up with Ace Queen or Ace 10 and decided to take a stab at this pot, you really can't do much with your bottom pair. And given Ultra Covert had pocket tens, his best bet was to try and taking it down, and then once you get 2 pair, all right, you're gonna have to value bet. So post flop was fine between you 2. All right, so moving on to the next hand here. Nitreg goes ahead and isolates it wide. I'm assuming wide out of the small blind. And then Daka Bear here always goes ahead and calls for throw away to the pot, and the board is very, very dry. Right, and on such a dry board, NetReg is going to be continuation betting a really wide range, and it should be anything from ace highs, king highs, queen highs, anything and everything is going to see betting here, just because it's very unlikely for you guys to hit anything as well. So NetReg continuation bets, and Daka Bear decides to raise. Now, a part of this theme of this video is going to be how you guys aren't raising your value hands enough. This is a classic example of where you don't raise a value hand, unfortunately, right? And I'd hate to include this in this kind of style video with how many hands I'm going to be going over later, but there's absolutely nothing you can represent on this flop by raising other than pocket 2s, pocket 4s, pocket 9s. There's no draws for you to be raising either. So if you're just raising with the fish behind you with pure air, right, it's not going to be very profitable because you have that fish behind you. It's also not very profitable because you just don't have any kind of draws or anything. So in this instance, it's fine to raise when you're playing against a big fish. Okay, like if this were iMilky coming in here, then raising it up is perfectly normal, just because he's not really thinking about it. But NetReg, on the other hand, is going to be folding 100% of his range here. That doesn't include sets, right? Maybe pocket aces, because you might feel like you're slow playing like queens or kings pre-flop, which would make no sense, just because NetReg opens up a really wide range and will 4-bet you too, like, and be more willing to get it in light with you pre-flop. So slow playing anything pre-flop against him is not going to be the best line to take. All right, and obviously NetReg here folds, and I mean, it's tough to really have that kind of. It's tough to have that kind of foresight or really trying to separate up between how to play like the nuts post-flop versus reg versus fish when in a situation you definitely don't want to be raising it up like on the flop here, hoping like your best bet is to hope that something comes in the turn that makes it look dry, like maybe the 10 of clubs or something like that, where you can represent a flush draw, maybe represent a straight draw, or at least make it look more bluffy. Maybe NetReg decides to check and maybe induce a bluff from you, and you can build a pot that way. Your best bet there is that when you decide to raise later in the hand, that your opponent has something that's caught up to you. But this early in the hand, it's just too much to be raising right now. And unfortunately, I don't even know what Daka Bear had, but I'm assuming he has the nuts here. If he doesn't have the nuts, then I would actually be very, very, very surprised. I don't know what Daka Bear has because he never sent it in his hands. So, all right. Another hand where NetReg opens, and we have another Daka Bear calling. Now, Daka Bear in this situation actually has ace-king suited. All right. And NetReg has ace-8. Now, I've got comments for both players in this situation. Daka Bear, I'd like to see you re-raise pre-flop nearly every single time against NetReg here. He's an aggressive. NetReg's an aggressive player. He's going to be 4-bet bluffing you. He's going to be getting it in with you fairly light pre-flop, especially if you're 3-betting him quite a bit. Where 3-betting with ace-king suited not only becomes like profitable, but pretty standard in the situation. So I like to see you do that. This isn't really a full ring game, and even if this were a full ring game and you're playing against somebody who has NetReg stats, you should be 3-betting for value pre-flop. All right. So in this situation, you go ahead and called, and you decide to float the flop here with your 2 overs and a gut shot, which a lot of people do, and I think it's an all right play. It's not necessarily something that like is super standard. We don't have any flush draws here, but calling I think is defendable. You're trying to hit that nut hand. We ended up hitting our top pair on the turn here, so now we're definitely going to be calling another street. Depending on the river size, probably calling that street as well. Although you got to be thinking to yourself, what is NetReg really betting 3 barrels here on this board? But either way, it's going to be hard for us to be folding top or top kicker against him. Now the next comment I'm going to be making is against NetReg, who has ace-8. And the turn bet, obviously 2-pair river bet, 2 pairs is going to be super standard. It's the flop bet that I seriously question the situation. We're going to find that we're going to be getting value from very few hands. perhaps maybe only ace 10, pocket 9s, and pocket 10s. No, I'm sorry. Those hands don't. I'm sorry, we don't beat those hands. So we're only going to be getting value from hands that we beat very rarely, like hands like ace 10, ace 9. I doubt Dakabear has ace 9 here. King 10 maybe. Otherwise, our opponent's going to be calling us with hands like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, any jack, any queen. So he's not folding any of those cards. He might be folding hands like 2s through 7s, but ace 8 against those kind of hands it doesn't really matter, right? Because we crush those hands anyway that we don't want them to fold. So in this scenario, I'm not a big fan of the ace 8 bet. What I would rather do is probably check call one street and try and induce a bluff from Dakabear and see if we can get one. What's going to happen most of the time against a tight regular is that they're either going to fire once, and at small stakes, not really necessarily where net reg plays, but like at 10 and 0, 25 and 0, they will be bluffing hands like 2s through 7s when you check to them here in this situation. And they will be bluffing, like they'll be turning my hands into bluffs to the point where we can actually check to induce a bet with the ace 8 rather than betting out and trying to get our opponent to fold a hand that will not be folding. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Alright, so in this hand, again, we have a net reg open raising, and we've got ultra covert calling. Now, ultra covert in this situation has queen jack offsuit, and queen jack offsuit pre-flop does not play very well. And the only thing we have to do there is to load up net regs, positional stats, middle position, open raise, 19%. Alright. Plug queen jack in. Put it in against 19%. See how we do. Queen jack offsuit sits right here. Alright. In order for us to be calling pre-flop on the button, we need to be ahead of 50% of his hand range. Alright. We're not getting any kind of a discounted price. You can go back here, we can see the odds that we're getting. We need roughly 40% equity. And we are exactly there at around 39.8. Alright. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, it's a break-even call, so we should call. Now, when it comes to playing against solid players, break-even calls become minus EV calls. And this is a little bit minus EV. In order for us to call here, I'd like to say that we are ahead of his hand range. And I would maybe King-Queen offsuit here becomes a call. Yeah, I think King-Queen offsuit becomes a much better call, especially if you've got some fish in the pot behind you, or fish in between you guys who have called. But what happened here is reg versus reg. You're on the button. Queen jack offsuit becomes a very, very marginal and very bad hand. Because what happens in situations like that follows, right? And the funny thing is, most of the time you can just look at somebody's big pots and see how many mistakes they make rather than the small mistakes. When you guys stop making mistakes in big pots, I think that's when you guys really become really good players, and it becomes much harder as a coach to really find those mistakes. But you still find the mistakes, but they're no longer in the big pots, and they're in the smaller pots. And that's something that we really like to see, is that like when you start making less and less mistakes in the big pots, you're going to see that your win rate starts to improve. And here's a situation where you make a mistake and you play a big pot. It's almost like the correlation is 1-on-1. All right, so we call the flop with the jack, which is certainly standard against net reg's opening range. And once we get 2-pair on the turn, again we're calling. I definitely don't like racing here in this situation, just because when we raise, we represent the nuts. Maybe even like ace 10 only, maybe a pocket 5, pocket jack kind of hand. And when we raise in this turn with our queen jack, we represent a stronger hand. We're not going to get called by a worse hand. So let's just go ahead and continue calling here. And most likely we're going to be calling a river bet as well. And if our opponent checks to us, then we're going to be value betting. What Nitreg does, though, he throws a big wrench in his plans as he overbets the pot for $2. Now, you got to think to yourself, is what would Nitreg do this with as a bluff compared to what he would do this with for value? And do we ever beat anything of his value range? And if we can beat hands of his value range, then I feel like we can be making this call. If we never beat any of his hands in his value range, then we probably shouldn't be making this call. All right, and so what I mean is, like, let's say we have a hand like King Queen here, and our opponent could be, I could be doing this with King Jack or maybe even Queen Jack, where King Queen becomes a better call because it's the top two pair. All right, if we had pocket fives here, then we'd probably be shipping it in on. Well, we might be raising the flop, but either that or we'll be raising the turn. But with pocket fives, it'd be a pretty standard call just because you could reasonably determine that NetReg is going to be betting this with many worse value hands, including all of like King Jack, King Queen, those kind of hands. But with a hand like Queen Jack, we almost have the bottom two pair in the scenario. It's really hard for us to have two pair that is worse than Queen Jack and still be in the scenario. And so therefore, like, our calling range is going to be pretty face up. NetReg knows what kind of hand range you're going to be calling down with. And when he makes that bet size like this, he's not really expecting you to call with a hand like, Ace Queen or Ace Jack. He's not expecting you to call with a hand like maybe even Ace King. All right. He thinks that most of the time here you're gonna have a hand like two pair, and it's true because the hands that you call with preflop, I guess two pair are better. You obviously have top pair here, I think most of the time, if not two pair. And in order to call this river bet, you're gonna have to have two pair or better, and you're not the kind of player ultra that would call down with garbage, right? So it'd be different if your stats were double what they were, 24-16. Where you're going to be calling wide pre-flop with anything from like Jack 9 to Jack 10 to all these other kind of crappy hands. Where NetReg feels like he can be barreling you and feel like you have a really wide hand range. But when you sit there and you start as a 12-8 pre-flop, which again is not exactly accurate because these range consider full ring, but when you're playing against middle position 2 button, the tight hand ranges become fairly similar. And so even if our VPIP is 21 and we cold call 17% of the time on this flop, NetReg is going to assume that you're going to be a really tight player and not barrel into you without a really strong hand. And this would be one of those scenarios where I think I would fold Queen Jack on the river to an overbet, an over pot size bet, and not feel too bad about it. I think what happens is most of the time, we fall in love with the hand. That's all we have two pair. Let's go ahead and call it down, or we don't really realize the size of the bets that our opponent is making and what that means. Right? Like what would a two thirds over bet pot mean? Well, it's usually going to be a really strong value hand, and it's very easy for NetReg to have a lot of strong hands in his hand range, including like pocket jacks are better, pocket fives are better, really. Ace 10, like all these kind of nut hands where it's really hard for us to have any nut hands in our hand range. Alright, and what happened was we did call. We took over, had the Queen Jack, and NetReg flopped the set of fives. Now, it is kind of cooler that you hit the two pair, and I know how hard that is to just go ahead and give up. But when it comes to being able to fold really strong hands, I feel like Queen Jack there could be a fold. But I think you would have. The most important thing here would be to fold the pre-flop, and once you get that done out of the way, then you're going to feel more comfortable playing post-flop. Alright, so I'm going to be right back. Alright, and so in this hand, Pyrotos raises it up, and Pyrotos is usually known to have a pretty wide range, and has a lot of fun when he's playing, and so he's definitely going to be playing more aggressive than, say, other regulars are, including myself, and perhaps even more than NetReg here. Dakabergos has re-raises it up here to 10 big blinds from 3. I think you are making it larger out of position, making it at least 48 cents, so 12 big blinds instead of 10. It's going to help your hand range out. To those of you who aren't aware, Pyrotos has Ace King, and Dakaber here has Pocket Kings. And with Pocket Kings, right, when you 3-bet and you get 4-bet, all right, and you get 4-bet by a rather large amount, which is in this situation 31 big blinds, right, like 3 times your 4-bet size, that's generally an indication of my opponent has a strong hand, all right? And when you've got Pocket Kings in a situation, your opponent's strong hand is meaning you should be getting it in right now, all right? And you should be taking advantage of your opponent's strong hand and shipping it all in pre-flop and just winning it that way. And here's, if you guys are all want to slow play the rest of his stack, if this were to happen to you every single time you hit pocket kings, you'd be a really, really rich man. All right, where if you could win 30 big blinds guaranteed with zero risk, all right, then more power to you. Here's the funny thing though, right? So let's say he does go all in, and you've got pocket kings, and let's say that you do have 80% equity against that hand range. On average, you're going to win 60 big blinds, only because you're going to win 80 and then lose 20. So on average, you're going to win 60 big blinds overall. In this situation, you're already guaranteed to win 31 without having to risk anything, without having to variance anything. So just going all in right now and taking it down is a great profit just to be had just with a hand like pocket kings. All right. Now, you throw in the fact that your opponent's going to have a very strong hand a lot of the times and be willing to call it off with you. It doesn't take very often for you to win. So let's say in order for you to match the profitability of you would have had before, right, you'd have to win another $1.20. So on the remainder of a stack here, you're only going to have to win roughly 60% of the time in order for you to show a profit. I believe that's my math. Maybe, I don't think that's right. But either way, just go ahead and get it all in pre-flop here against your opponent's tight hand range with your pocket kings, and we call it a day. What happened though was we called pre-flop. We're playing out of position, and what happens when you call a 4-bet pre-flop is you're symbolizing right now you have a made hand, all right? Or you have a really strong hand. It's a made hand. You can't bluff call. You could 4-bet, 5-bet shove here as a bluff. Okay, I'm not saying that you would, but you certainly could. And it's always going to be a part of Pyrotos or anybody's really thought process of like, well, maybe he's bluffing here sometimes. But when you call pre-flop in the situation, you can't be bluffing. There's just no way you ever have a bluff or any kind of marginal hand. And so when you 3-bet and then call a 4-bet, your hand range is like jacks are better than ace king nearly every single time. And it's not even difficult to put you on a hand range in that situation. All right. And so why would you put yourself in such a situation where your hand range is always that, where you could be, you could have jacks are better than ace king if you 4-bet jam, but you might also have ace 8 or ace queen. I mean, you never know. So in this situation, I'd like to see you go and get it all in pre. We flop, a lot of times what's going to happen is when we do have that pocket kings, that ace comes on the board, and if we were all in pre-flop right now, there's nothing we can do about it. But post-flop, now we're forced playing in a pot where we have a little over one spec-to-pot ratio where it's really hard for us to fold. And our opponent's not going to be really value betting us too much, or value betting too many worse hands. And so, how do we play this hand from now on? Pyrotos did the right play here by checking behind the ace. And what happens is it really it makes it unlikely. Pyrotos is representing a worse hand right now than the ace, which is really what he wants to do, given that he has probably the nuts on this board. Once that ace of spades comes out, it's almost like Zuckerberg gets unlucky just because he now feels compelled that he's going to have to call 2 streets. If I probably would call once and then fold the river here, rather than calling it off, especially once this jack hits. We only beat now pocket queens against Pyrotos' value betting range. Pre-flop, value 4-bet range pre-flop, right? So we lose to jacks, we lose to ace king, we lose to pocket aces. There's just not very much we beat right now. I probably would be folding this river even though it's really gross. We're getting 4-1 on our money. But I just don't see Pyrotos really bluffing us, given that we have a very we have a very open hand range, and it's very easy for us to be read by an experienced player. But again, all this could have been done by just getting it all in pre-flop. All right, so we'll go on to the next hand. We have Ultra Covert, decides to raise it up, gets cold call by a somewhat loose reg, and then we have net reg here, goes ahead and isolates. And net reg always going to have a good re-raise size in this situation, giving Ultra Covert roughly 10% implied odds to make the call. Now, regardless of if you think Netreg is squeezing here as a bluff, or if you think Netreg's doing this for value, I believe our hand ranges are going to be relatively the same in terms of like calling, and in terms of 4-bet bluffing, and in terms of 4-betting for value. And if you guys are going to be 4-betting pre-flop here in a situation, one of the most important things to consider, and I talk about this a lot when it comes to 4-bet theory and playing against 3-bets, is your 4-bet sizing. Now, to those of you who have watched all my lectures, what's a good 4-bet size here? All right, it's 30 big blinds or less. Your goal is to never 4-bet over 30 big blinds, unless it's absolutely imperative, unless it's some kind of strange play. But 4-betting 30 big blinds or less is going to be the standard maneuver, right? So whenever I see a 4-bet greater than 30 big blinds, it just kind of raises a red flag. Now this one is a 4-bet to 46 big blinds. Now I know there's some history here between Netreg and Ultra Covert. Netreg, I believe, coaches Ultra Covert, and maybe this is something they've gone through in their session. But this 4-bet size is not very good. We got to be 4-betting at most $1.20. And here's the thing, right? Your 4-bet to $1.20 is going to have the same fold equity as a 4-bet here to $1.75. And so therefore, when you're comparing the EV of the two plays, the 4-bet to $1.75 is massively much more plus EV than, say, the 4-bet to $1.20. Or I'm sorry, massively minus EV than the 4-bet to $1.20. And the thing is, like, we don't even have to 4-bet to $1.20. We could 4-bet to $1.10, or $1.15, trying to get for 4-bet bluffing. All right, the best raise size is the lowest you possibly can while still having fold equity. All right, and that would be, I would say, between $1.10 and $1.20 here, if you think Netreg's bluffing, and that's okay. I mean, if Netreg squeezes quite a bit, and he folds too after 3-betting, or after 3-betting a decent amount. So I don't mind you 4-bet bluffing him here. I just mind the 4-bet size. And going into it, Ultra Covert here has ace-jack offsuit, which is actually a pretty good hand to 4-bet bluff in this situation, given the fact that we can't really call it, given Netreg's value range that he's representing. We can't really call the ace-jack, but like it becomes like the next best option for 4-bet bluffing. So you've got a really good 4-bet bluffing range here. But if you were to just go ahead and just knock the size down a little bit, then not even a little bit, like by a third, it would become much more profitable. And the reason why we don't want to have to be able to call this raise size here, and given the equity or given the price that we're getting, right, which at $4, you have to take away $1.39 from Netreg's pot size here. So it's roughly a $6 pot and $2.25 to call. So we're getting almost 3-to-1 in our money. We only need 25%. Throwing any kind of a reasonable hand range here with the ace-jack offsuit after 4-betting such a large size, 4-bet folding this amount. All right, let's give Netreg a hand range of aces, kings, queens, ace, king. All right, just that. Oops. Hit apply here. Hit evaluate. Ace-jack has roughly 25% equity here. I mean, we're at the point now we should probably be calling with the ace-jack offsuit, just because it's a break-even call for us, and we've risked 45 big blinds. And I mean, another general rule of thumb for you: don't put half your stack in the middle and then fold, especially with in a situation like this on a bluff where you've given yourself no chance of winning. When you go ahead and put so much money in and then fold, if we only had put in 27, 28 big blinds and then folding here, it becomes very, very standard. But once you've gone ahead and crossed that threshold of putting so much money in the pot, then we almost have to call, which is something that we don't want to have to do, but we do have to. All right, so I'm going to be right back. All right, so I've got 2 more hands here for you. First one, again, Ultra Covert, and now we have Tyke. He goes by Roy on the forums. He goes ahead and calls, and decides to go ahead and lead out. All right, and I'm going to tell you right now, Ultra Covert has pocket 9s, and Viceroy's pocket jacks. And so far, actually, everybody's play has been debatable, has been fine. There's no problem with just calling the jacks pre-flop against somebody who's just a really tight player. If Ultra Covert is more aggressive pre-flop, then for sure jacks becomes part of my value re-raising range here. But as play against such a tight player as Ultra Covert is, re-raising jacks becomes not the best play. Leading out in this flop is understandable. Trying to just go for value here, or definitely don't have, having an overpair becomes a situation where so far we're underrepresented our hand. We can easily be bluffing this board, and our opponent is going to be hopefully bluffing us a lot on this flop as well. And the thing with Ultra Covert here is that you never raise post flop ever, and you seriously would get the least value you possibly can from your nut hands. And this was what I brought up earlier in the video, where a lot of the times you guys flop these really strong hands, but then refuse to get any value from them. Raising this flop even would have been a perfect situation for you, just because you can make it look the most bluffiest, right? You can raise him here to like 50, 55 cents, and your hand range is still going to be extremely wide open. It could be anything from like top pair to kicker, to an overpair, to like queen jack, to just a flat out air bluff, to your nut hand. That any kind of reasonable value range here, including like top pair or better, a lot of your draws that you're playing against are going to be calling a flop raise that you can get value right now from this hand and really start to build that pot. If you raise it to 50 cents right now, pot would be 128. It would almost be, it's going to be 60, 70% more larger than it is right now, and it's going to allow you to get the stack in the middle. Given that you didn't raise the flop, I mean, you've got to raise this turn bet given it's only a half pot. All right, when you get to the river and you don't even have effective stacks of you're not able to get in, you make one last final pot size river bet to get stacks in, then you're doing something wrong when you have such a strong hand like this. Now, earlier in the video, I talked about how you shouldn't be raising your set on like a 9-4 deuce rainbow board, right, against a regular. And it's so true, because 9-4-2, first off, is such a dry board, right? But just given the dynamic that we've had so far, where our opponent leads into us, we could very easily be thinking that we're going to be taking it away from him or trying to bluff raise. Plus, this flop is invariably much more drawy than the other one that we had. There's tons of draws, there are tons of backdoor straight draws. And then even if you don't raise the flop, raising the turn, once that flush draw becomes a possibility, then we're going to be at least representing more draws than we would have otherwise. And so we've got to give ourselves the opportunity to get stacks in. And you'll never really win a big pot, or you'll never win stacks, which is rarely where your profit comes in when you win stacks with the nuts. You'll never get those big stacks if you never ever want to raise post flop and put your opponent to the test and trying to feel like your opponent is going to like never. If you always think your opponent's never paying you off, then one, you choose better tables, which is the GCS, so you really can't do that. But two, I think you give your opponent too much credit, and the more you raise post flop, the more people are going to think that you're bluffing, even though you could be doing it for value every single time. All right, going on the next hand here. This is definitely an interesting 3-betting and 4-betting dynamic that these two players have. Pyrotos decides to re-raise Kenny's under the gun raise, which is something that is I would certainly avoid. I would certainly avoid doing it. It's not necessarily a bad 3-bet. Okay, Pyrotos has King 10 of clubs here, and so given that kind of a hand range, it's actually not that bad of a 3-bet as a bluff. I think Pyrotos you should be raising it up a little wider. I'm sorry, a little larger. And if I'm Kenny in the situation with the King Queen offsuit, we definitely can't call the 3-bet in the situation. So you did choose a good hand to 4-bet bluff with. I feel like the hand itself is okay. I feel like your 4-bet size is a little large. 30, you do that 30 big blinds on the dot, and it's 3x his raise size, and I feel like you could be doing a lot smaller, like 95 to $1, and have it be the exact same fold equity that you're going to have, so it would save you 20 cents or 5 big blinds. But that said, most of the time I think you should be folding here versus under the gun when you raise under the gun versus a big blind 3-bet. You must have some kind of read that I don't, knowing that Pyretos is bluffing you here. So that's kind of interesting for sure. But Pyretos, on the other hand, now calls the 4-bet of King 10 suited, which is invariably now the worst play so far that we've seen. Calling the 4-bet like this out of position with such a marginal hand. What happens is when we call the 4-bet and we just kind of check it down here, and then kind of bluffs the return on us and folds, which is a very large bet size for sure. I think we could get away with a smaller bet size with King Queen. Like, I would try to go roughly half my stack, if not a little less than. So maybe $1.60 here would be fine. Not trying to put in a vast majority of our stack size right here. But Pyretos, you've got to give yourself a chance to bluff this turn if you're calling 4-bets out of position like that. You just can't hope to hit and then check it down, and when you miss, especially when your opponent checks the ace. I mean, when that happens, is he's either got like the ace itself, right, that he's slow playing, or he doesn't have the ace and he's trying to just get the showdown and play a cheap pot where, I mean, you call a 4-bet out of position, you bet the turn, you could conceivably bet the river and represent that ace pretty easily if you're Pyretos. And I feel like I think you've got to make that play after calling the 4-bet pre-flop, or rather than checking and then check folding this turn, because we certainly can't call it pre-flop just for value or just for the odds that we're getting. All right, so I'm gonna be right back. All right, so I'm only gonna be reviewing 2 more hands here, as I feel like I'm going to be going too long into the video and discussing, rediscussing certain scenarios here over and over. But all right, so here we have ultra covert raising up onto the gun with ace king, and we get 3-bet squeezed by a rather fishy player. And by this time in the game, right, we've been playing for an hour, so I think all of these stats are relevant. They're all from this session. So if you guys are running the HUD, then you're going to see that this guy's kind of a crazy maniac. Now, against a player like this, 4-betting and getting it in pre-flop is actually fine. I mean, if you were to 4-bet here and trying to stack off, I certainly wouldn't have a problem with it, just because he's an agromaniac, he's a fish. I mean, we've got ace king, and your opponent's going to show up here with just so much garbage, and just he's just kind of out here gambling, right? So don't give your opponent that much credit that your opponent is like, he has a really tight hand range here where he could be very easily 3-betting like ace queen, ace jack for value, and versus a 4-bet, possibly even getting those hands all in just because he doesn't really know what he's doing, right? So I would be 4-betting ace king here a large percentage of the time against this kind of hand range. Once we call pre-flop, right, and we flop 2 overcards and the second nut flush, with a stacked part ratio of roughly 3-to-1, a little over 3-to-1, we can't just call here for just pot odds, right, or implied odds. We're getting, the pot size bet is giving us 2-to-1 in our money. The equity that we have on this board, what do you think that we have, right? We might have 9 outs. I doubt we have 15 clean outs, right? If we are behind, all right, we might even be ahead. But what is the implied odds of drawing just for the flush on the 1 street, right? We need 4-to-1 odds, and we're just barely getting that, so this is going to be like roughly a break-even call if we had the nut flush. But honestly, against somebody who's got such a wide range, like, why don't we just get it all in right here and right now, right? Like, given the only hand that you really don't want to see right now is like ace queen with the ace of spades, as even like pocket aces with the ace of spades, I guess would be the hand that you really don't want to see. But both of those scenarios, you're up against a hand that's got a really strong, who's got nuts against you. But all other hands that he's gonna have, you're doing okay with. Right? Let's say he has king queen here. All right, you've got 12 outs. That's more than enough equity to go ahead and just get it all in right now, given the pot size. Given that there's like 50 big blinds in the middle, getting it all in would be the standard play if you know he has king queen here. All right, and you've got your hand range. Just because like you want to be able to see both the turn on the river and it's gonna be plus EV. And the thing is, like if you check raise all in here, you're gonna have some fold equity. Your opponent's gonna be folding some worse, I'm sorry, some better hands, right? If he has tens or jacks, he might be folding those hands. You might even fold out like another ace king that would have chopped with you if you guys both miss. So I would be getting it all in here. Now we end up calling and we get a free turn card, free river card rather, and we end up hitting our flush on the river. And yeah, I think about it this way too: is betting the river here the most is going to be the best way to get value from your hand. All right. Now, arguably with the second nut flush, all right, it plays differently when you have the 4 flush compared to having just the 3 flush out there. All right. So when you have the 4 flush and the ace high flushes out there, you're pretty much putting your entire stack here at risk. So you might as well just go all in just because your opponent has $3 behind you. So you should just be going all in for $3 and letting it affect that way. Hopefully, I think if you go all in here, I think your opponent will call you with a little bit worse hands. And so I'm not really necessarily saying that that's a bad value bet in the river. Just that the raise size here, I think if you were just to go all in it's only $3.05. So for another 12 big blinds, just go and get the rest of the stack in. But I think it would save you a lot more grief if you just went ahead and just shipped it in on this flop. All right, so one more hand, and it's going to be another Nitreg hand with Viceroy. Viceroy opens up the queens, and Nitreg calls with pocket eights. So this is going to be a relatively common situation, right, where we start pre-flop with the nut hand. We see the flop, and overcard comes. How do you play it? All right. Do we go into check call mode? Do we try or eke out a value bet here against Nitreg? When we bet this flop, all right. Against Nitreg is going to be calling us with a really wide range in this flop, and so arguably you could say we're going for small value in situations. We're not necessarily turning this hand into a bluff just yet. And against Nitreg, betting out here might be the best play, given the fact that Nitreg folds to c-bets 37% of the time. And Nitreg is going to be calling pre-flop with any pair. He's going to be calling this flop with pretty much any pair, and go that route. And I feel like the queens here, you could argue a continuation bet would be okay. Maybe I would make it a little less. Against a more standard reg, against somebody who isn't going to be as strong of a player as Nitreg is, checking is going to be the best play the majority of the time, and inducing bluffs from our opponent that way. All right. What the bigger problem I have actually is from Nitreg on the turn, because Nitreg has the pocket tens. All right. And what Nitreg does on the turn is he turns his hand into a bluff, trying to get our opponent to fold. And the thing is, like, our opponent doesn't really fold that many hands that we really want him to fold, right? So, like, if our opponent's hand range is like ace, queen, tens, and jacks, I'm sorry, ace, queen, queens, and jacks, right? The hands that we would probably get a lot of the folds. He's going to have ace, queen, 16 combinations, and tens and jacks, jacks and queens, 12, right? So he's going to be folding the ace, queen more often than he's going to be folding the jacks and the queens. So therefore, we don't necessarily want him to fold. And even then, I feel like tens are going to be ahead enough at showdown that we don't only turn into a bluff, right? So I think it's a very bad bet on the turn with the tens. The queens on the flop is a more marginal value bet than otherwise. But here's the test that I usually give my students, and that's if when you bet that flop, you were hoping for your opponent to fold, then it's a bad bet. All right. And sometimes people can bet correctly, but for the wrong reasons. And so if you were betting that flop hoping for fold equity, and if you guys bet that flop all the time hoping hoping your opponent to fold, then you have a serious leak in your game. But if you're betting that flop, all right, and hoping your opponent calls you with the hand range that Rick did call you with, then you played it fine, and that's what I wanted to bring up. So, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and shut it down right now. I think we're getting past the time here, and I feel like overall, I'd like to. I wish I could have covered more hands, but you guys definitely need to be raising your value hands more post flop and get that down because I feel like I've saw that way too many hands. I just really didn't get a chance to review them all. And I think I talked with UCD Lacrosse, and hopefully he's going to be covering that topic in the next podcast for you. And maybe I might do a GS short on it too. So we're going to try and get that leak narrowed down. And that's why I like doing these Garnet School Cash Games reviews. Is that like when I look over all your guys' hands, I'm able to see trends of bad plays and try and get those out of the way. Just so everybody has, and I feel like a lot of players right now have these same leaks, and so hopefully you guys are able to learn something from it. Otherwise, guys, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for playing. Thank you, nearly everybody, for sending in the hands. The only person who didn't send me in the hands this week was Daka Bear, so shame on you, Daka Bear. In fact, he's actually really good about sending in hands to me. So, oh well, it's okay. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Good luck at the tables.